The Square Ball Podcast.
Welcome to the show that's brought to you with Levi Solicitors. 10% discount on your legal fees at levisolicitors.co.uk/the Square Ball. Usual trio with you. Dan, Michael with his head like a... Is it a butt plug?
A butt plug. Or an Easter egg.
Yes.
Or an Easter egg.
Depending on which end of the watershed we are.
Do not mix the two up either.
No.
We go on a...
Happy Easter, children.
Yes, let's go in the garden and on a Easter hunt.
And Moscow's here as well, of course, for the weekly show. TSB Plus, you can get Propaganda Extra, where we've confronted our deepest, darkest fears this week. What if we'd gone down?
Doesn't sound like a selling point.
And it was all through the prism of some Burnley fans who are suffering terrible existential dread as a result of going down.
Realising they still own Bailey Peacock Farrell.
Yes, that's the big
It's essentially the root of it.
It's the big factor of their relegation that I did not considered until I heard him saying that, Nick Pope will go, but we'll get Bailey from...
But yeah, TSB Plus, you get bonus podcasts every week. You get the Match Ball live stream after games, priority access to all that, extra ball, merch discounts, loads and loads of stuff. Daily email from Moscow, which is excellent, by the way. Keeps you in touch with all the important Leeds United stuff, which is that we are a Premier League club.
Better than Twitter.
Yes, that is at thesquareball.net/plus if you fancy supporting us. We do appreciate it, so thank you. Part 1 of the show. There will be no preview this week in part 2 because the season is over.
We're not previewing the Aston Villa game in Australia or whatever it is. What is that our next fixture?
Should we do that closer to the time?
Okay, yeah, that's fair enough.
Yeah, let's do that. We said that Relegation Watch was going in the bin. We can now officially consign it to the bin.
Should we run it from the start of next season?
No. Let's never, ever go there again.
Game 1, we're in the bottom 3.
Mid-table safety watch.
Yes.
I'll do, won't it?
Well, Relegation Watch is officially over. It's history. We finished 17th, as we well know. One of the interesting things from looking at the final table, look at how close Southampton are to our finish in the end, in 15th position, 2 points further forward than us. So they've basically lost 2 fewer games and drawn them instead. So 2 draws is the difference, one of which was against us. So they've been comfortable all season, but look at them, they're really close.
Well, they can go down next year, can't they? That'd be nice. I'm looking for people to make an early claim for the relegation places next year, and hopefully they'll stick with Hasenhüttl and he can continue this form. Obviously got to factor Brentford in, plus the promoted teams. Yes.
Southampton really hit the beach really early. They've won 1 in the last, pause while I count, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. I think it's 13 games.
Really?
Yeah, that includes the FA Cup quarter-final. But before that, they'd won 5 out of 7, and then only lost 1 in, how many is that?
Moscow does numbers.
15. Like you said, Moscow, 9 wins keeps you up.
Yeah, 9 wins keeps you up. It kept us up. It's kept Southampton up. Everton ended up with 11 wins, but 21 defeats, which is quite high.
And look at Brighton.
Yeah, absolutely.
12 wins.
They have to go.
Extraordinary stuff.
They're going to have to go down next year, aren't they?
Well, like I always say, if they sign a striker, they'll be fine. They bought some in January, but they then loaned them out to their Belgian cousin club. So that doesn't. I don't know whether they're going to be good players or not. Bad players. Just sign Harry Kane. You know you want it.
Funny to see Man United finishing up in the Europa League where they don't want to be. Conference League would have been funnier. Because they're not happy, are they? I mean, look at the finish with a neutral goal difference, 57 in, 57 out.
It's their worst Premier League season ever. Obviously, before the Premier League, they were relegated lots of times.
Well, they finished on 58 points out of 59 last season. Would have seen us finish 6th in that spot this year, which is mental, isn't it?
Oh, I'd have loved the bloody... Even the Conference League I'd have loved. Never mind. Next year.
Are Scum kind of responsible for how difficult our season got? Because that means that and this is me thinking in numbers again, so this could all be wrong, but if we would have finished 6th with the points we got last year, that suggests that the teams at the top of the table, or at least in that bit, won fewer points this season. That's why the teams at the bottom had more points, which made it so much more difficult for us to stay up. Watford beat them 4-1, didn't they?
It was a much tighter division, I think is the point you're trying to angle at. Yeah.
No, I'm not angling that. I'm saying it's Scum's fault for being shit. They lost to Everton. If they hadn't lost to Everton, we would have been much more comfortable. What did they do against Burnley? I bet they fucking lost to them.
Spiteful. Very spiteful.
Yeah, their terrible season, hilarious as it was, almost had quite poor repercussions for us. I mean, they only beat Norwich 3-2.
There's some interesting stuff in the stats when you start to pick it apart. I went on a...
they drew with Burnley, 1-1.
Went onto a stats website last night and just pulled some figures from it. Because we conceded over 2 goals per game. 79 goals conceded, which is a lot.
Entertaining. Good.
Yeah, from 38 games, which is the 19th rank. So only Norwich conceded more than us. But our expected goals against... So the expected goals, I know it's a flawed stat, but it's basically, it ranks... How many times out of 100 would that shot have gone in, typically? And they give it a score according to their algorithm. It's supposed to be a measure of the quality of chances that you create and that you're on the receiving end of. According to expected goals against, we should have conceded 71 rather than 79. Still would have been the second worst in the division, though. So we were about on par with where our performance and the chances that we conceded suggested. Basically, leaky defence, but we should have conceded slightly fewer. Going forward, now this is where it gets a bit more interesting because we scored just over 1 goal per game. We got 42 in 38 games, which ranks us 16th in the Premier League. We should have got, according to the XG, 51 goals, just over 51, which would have ranked us 9th overall. So the conclusion from that is that we had an underachieving attack. It's almost like we needed a centre forward this season, isn't it?
Right. No attack for a lot of it. It was a winger and sometimes Rodrigo. Which is the same difference, really, isn't it, in terms of output? I mean, Dan James got some goals. Jackie Harrison got some goals. But yeah, the very, very obvious gap in the middle.
I mean, last season wasn't just goals with Bamford, was it? It was assists. So taking him out of this year, which he basically was, I think he only started 7 games, in the end, screwed us big style. And
if our attack had met its expected goals target, the expected points that kind of flows from that is 43.86 based on the chances that we created. So if our defence and attack had performed as expected, we would have finished 12th.
Are you taking 43.86 points for next season now, or are you rolling the dice?
I would say we go for 50.
Okay, you're not going to accept less than 50.
I think I'd accept 48.86.
Okay.
No, I think if we can get to sort of March and we've got 40 points on the board, if we fully Southampton it, then I'll exhale. Cause it's felt like we've kind of been sussing the division out for a couple of years. Yeah, just seeing what works, what doesn't.
We're going to try being shit this year, see what happens.
But we've now found out that 40 points does keep you safe. So once you get to that point, you are pretty much going to stay up, aren't you?
I mean, at one point this year, I think when Burnley kept winning games, I was convinced of myself that we'd need like 50 points to stay up because that week, didn't they, where they won? Did they win 3 games in a week or something at some stage? It was just, it was entirely unfair that they suddenly looked dead good.
And after sacking Dyche as well.
You know, we said it was like you were trying to work out where you lay on the sort of danger scale because they obviously beat Everton, didn't they? Which was funny at the time. And Everton eventually stayed up and Burnley eventually went down. So that game proved to be meaningless in the end. But 12th finish, if you scroll down on the thing and look at Jesse's form, so it's only a relatively small data set, but out of the last 12 games, the form in the table is 12th, so we're about, sort of middling. We got 15 points out of 12 games. I mean, you can look at the top end. Liverpool 32 of the last 12. Watford got 4 of the last 12, and the Roy Hodgson factor there. So
I bet Hodgson is disappointed to have got that many, given the way he looked.
So if you extrapolate out over the course of a season, we finished 12th according to Jesse's form there. Would you accept a 12th place finish next season?
Yes.
And
there doesn't need to be anything else, just yes.
And get him what he got, because it was 1.25 points per game, wasn't it? He got, which is a step up on Bielsa, which was 0.88. So desired effect was had. Let's see what that works out to. So 47.5 points according to that next season.
That'd be fine for me. And I'd like the bottom 3 to be a bit more detached as they were last year. When did you need 29 points or something to stay up the year before? They
were basically cut adrift right from the get-go, weren't they?
That was comfortable. I want that again, please.
Yeah.
So if Huddersfield could come up and just like stink the place out, perfect.
Which would you prefer out of the two, Forest or Huddersfield? Because there's a good heritage fixture there in Forest, isn't there? Like, it feels like we've spoken before, like, about how you think the Premier League should be made up of teams that were in there when you were 13 years old, including Oldham, Swindon, that kind of thing. But Forest carries that with it, doesn't it?
While we're still getting comfortable here, I'd rather have Huddersfield, because I don't think they'll spend any money. Yeah. Whereas Forest have got potential to, be half decent in this league.
Isn't their owner still quite mad?
Probably, yeah.
Yeah, so there's that they could just.
Are you thinking of the Greek shipping guy?
Yeah,
I think they've been taken over by Americans now.
Is that why they're good now?
Yeah,
okay.
Yeah. Got their act together.
Okay, I mean can the Premier League handle the glamour of Steve Cooper? That's the thing.
We'll soon find out, won't we? Isn't it nice as well being able to watch that playoff final, which is going to happen after it's just as our walk's finishing, actually, isn't it? This coming week. That kicks off at 4:30 on Sunday, and it doesn't really matter what happens there, because it would have been awful facing the jeopardy of, as much as we wouldn't like to admit it, of Huddersfield replacing us in the Premier League.
I'll be able to talk myself into either outcome being the better.
Yeah, it's fine either way, really, isn't it? Huddersfield will be annoying the way they were the last time, where they were like they had that first season of being aren't they quite good? How surprising, how quaint, how sweet, which is kind of the role that Brentford have played this year.
But they won't get that second time round, though, if they come up, will they? Because they've been up recently.
Yeah, I guess so, but they still have that kind of plucky... Did they ever take down the Premier League town signs?
I don't know.
Just leave them up.
We'll find out as we walk through it this week, won't we?
Yeah, keep your eyes open.
Soon enough. But I don't really mind which one of them comes up, to be perfectly honest. It's fun either way, I think.
Yeah, it's fine.
So we did stay up. Were they justified in sacking Bielsa? In the end, the ends justifies the means, doesn't it?
Yeah.
For me, you can't argue against it, can you? Now, in the end, because we stayed up as much as it hurts.
Moscow will. Yeah, it's impossible to know either way, isn't it? But I think Bielsa was probably taking us down,
which is unfortunate. But as we've said, like on the match ball, this is the end of that era now, and it's neatly packaged off, and we can say that legacy is not damaged. The legacy of the players is not damaged. I guess in many ways it starts now, doesn't it?
Yeah, I mean, there's still a horribly fine margin in us staying up with pivotal games that have turned, like the Wolves match and Joffrey's late winner against Norwich and stuff. There's potential for it to still go very badly wrong, and I must admit,
but it didn't, though, did it?
But it didn't. So yeah, that's the thing.
You're imagining a future there that didn't happen. It played out the way it played out.
At least the board have acknowledged it has been a painful season.
Yeah,
that's something.
I think that it had to happen.
Not taking full responsibility for it, but they've kind of danced around the edges of some things have not been great, and maybe we were partly involved in this.
But are they not? I mean, I'm playing devil's advocate here because I don't necessarily agree, but are they not justified in taking that approach? Because ultimately, the decision that they took, the gamble that they made by sacking Bielsa and putting Marsh in, it boiled down to a red versus black at the casino table, didn't it? And they were proven right. I mean,
arguably the gamble was in not buying midfielders and strikers when we clearly needed them.
But that, to me, is where I've pulled the phrase like systematic failure, because it was the system that broke down. Because they're going to say, and we've seen it already, like Eddie Gray went on TalkSport, didn't he, and said Bielsa wouldn't take players. They wanted to buy players, but he wouldn't have them. And there's probably some truth in that.
But then that is the line that the club are very much pushing out.
Yeah.
So...
Yeah, no, absolutely. I'm saying some truth in it. Whether that's entirely true or not, I'm sure it's a slightly more grey area in that he probably did want players, as he said specifically in his press conferences, but the ones that we were after, I think as Moscow, you said over on Propaganda, would have been too expensive.
Well, either too expensive or they were for Jesse Marsh, which, Brendan Aronson is a Red Bull Salzburg player. Minamino at Liverpool is a former Jesse Marsh Red Bull Salzburg player. And if you take Angus Kinnear's programme notes from when from Marsh's first game at Elland Road, when he said that he never said, he did describe it as sacking Bielsa. He said it was the acceleration of the coaching transition, and that knowing the requirements to evolve from Marcelo at the end of the season meant the process to identify and secure a successor was ongoing and well advanced. So from Angus Kinnear's point of view, what he's been telling us is that at the end of this season, we were always getting rid of Marcelo Bielsa, whether he wanted to go or not. There was a requirement to evolve from Marcelo, at the end of the season. What they did at the end of February was speed that up, go with Jesse Marsh now instead of in summer. And then you look back and think, well, it makes sense then that we were trying to sign Brendan Aronson because he'll be good for next season, and then we're interested in Minamino because he'll be good for next season. And I do wonder what other players they were offering to Marcelo Bielsa that were actually for next season, who would have, if we get them in now, there might be some use. But there was really, I remember we were talking about Brendan Aronson here and we were quite confused. Like, he sounds like a very good player, but I think, what position does he actually play in a Bielsa lineup? Because he's a narrow 10 who plays to the side. He's not a winger, he's not a Calvin Phillips replacement, he's not a Click replacement,
Rodrigo replacement.
Well, he's not even that. He doesn't play as a on his own behind a striker. He's always played as a 2. He's a 21-year-old for the future. And I think I think that in that is probably the germ of where this season went so badly wrong, is that they were too busy worrying about what they're going to do next season, particularly when it came to January. They didn't do anything to solve any of the problems in January. It's very easy to say Bielsa didn't want any players signing. We offered him all these players. One, were the players that he could actually use, or were they players that you're thinking will be useful next season and we can get them in early? But that's kind of a secondary thing. And the other thing is, what fucking good is it to let your head coach block all these transfers who are going to save the season, then sack him in at the end of February when it's too late to buy any of them, and then just go pissing and moaning to the press about him?
Well, that does show, doesn't it? Because Phil Haye, in his article where he's done the debrief of the season end article, has said that there was a loss of faith around the window. So it sounds to me like they probably knew they were going to replace him in the summer. January came around and they were trying to get players in, as you say there, Moscow. Didn't quite happen, so they thought, right, okay, we'll stick with what we've got, hope it's enough, and then justified it by saying it was enough. Then the results started to go off a cliff, and they thought, shit, what have we done? And you can see that, you compare the notes that Kinnear put out whilst Bielsa was here off the back of the window, and then sacking him, that's what happened there. The loss of faith was in that specific window where they thought, we should hopefully have enough, and then the results went off a cliff, and then they thought we've got to act, and it was probably partly a mess of their own making.
Yeah, I don't know whether it's a loss of faith in January or kind of they assumed, as we probably did, that Bielsa he'd be fine with whatever. And if you remember the start of last season, all the gossip was from the club side, this will be Bielsa's last year. There was a lot of people saying that, and I was very confused by it, because I was thinking, we just finished 9th in the Premier League. This is the best. Why would you decide now that this is Bielsa's last year? But there was so much talk of that, like, here we go. And I don't think Bielsa at any point has looked like a coach who wanted to leave Leeds at any time. He left in tears, and he was talking about, I'll stay here forever. He'll keep signing those 1-year contracts and keep doing his thing. And I think the key to know from this season is at what point the board decided it was a requirement to evolve from Marcelo at the end of the season. And when I look back to last summer's transfer business, and I think chasing the midfielder, Conor Gallagher was only ever available on a 1-year loan, and there was absolutely no prospect of buying him at the end of that loan. So he's a player for 1 season. And then Lewis O'Brien, who they would only bid up to a certain amount for, I wonder how the tally would go between the amount they were willing to pay for O'Brien and maybe the loan fee they would have had to pay for Gallagher. Is, again, he's a player that they think, well, Marcelo's going at the end of the season anyway, so we really only need O'Brien for 1 year, so we're only going to pay so much. Because if you wouldn't think at the last summer, after the first season in the Premier League was so good, I don't think anybody would think at that point, well, this is probably give Marcelo Bielsa one more year and then get rid of him, because it had been so good in the Premier League. You're then going back to the summer after promotion, when there was a lot more discussion about, is Marcelo going to be given the reins in the Premier League, or are they going to make the change now? And that's when we were introduced to the idea of a 2-year plan that we'll survive for 2 seasons, we'll do all our business in summer 2020, build a squad that's good enough for 2 seasons, and then after that we start to build for Europe. So I'm joining the dots going backwards. It seems to me that straight after promotion they decided, right, Marcelo Bielsa can keep us up for 2 years, and then we get rid of him, whatever happens. And then that's forward planning, and that's fine. Forward planning is perfectly reasonable to have a long-term strategy, but it does then create this danger of you taking your eye off what is actually happening
now
in front of you now. So if you get to January and all your thoughts are, well, we gave Bielsa all these players last year. Look what he did with the Heckingbottom squad. He doesn't need anything. We're offering him a load of players for next season because those are the players we want. We don't want to spend money buying players or getting them in on loan for a manager who isn't going to be here in 6 months because there is a requirement that we have to evolve from him. And then you don't buy a striker and you don't buy a Calvin Phillips replacement and then you don't buy a midfielder, even though the glaringly obvious thing that never happened was responding to the Brentford game when Bamford, Phillips and Cooper all got long-term injuries in the same match, and that's the experienced spine of the team. 3 brilliant players. Up until then, I've been able to kind of say, I'm fine along with the squad and the way it's going and hoping that things will get better. January exists and there is a transfer window there to improve. And even if you don't like signing players, because clubs always like, no, we don't like signing players. We want to do our business in summer. Circumstances really changed around that Brentford game. Hold your nose, bring some players in.
It was early December as well, wasn't it? So, talk about an absolutely glaring warning as well.
Yeah.
So I think
you've got a month to prepare. And you saw when we now know, it was only Marsh was talking about it, of like how seriously Calvin Phillips was injured, how long he ended up being out, how long Liam Cooper ended up being out from that game. But they must have had the diagnosis by January. And then I just get this feeling that too much of their mind by that point was all about what they're going to do next season. With this, it's not faith in Bielsa by that point, it's an assumption that he'll just keep us up and it'll be fine, and we can give him players that will help us in the future because he's not actually going to put us in any danger. And then it does get to the end of February and you are thinking, he has stopped turning water into wine, what the fuck are we going to do? And then it does turn out that what they're going to do is sack him, accelerate the coaching transition, in Kinnear's phrase, do the stuff that they were going to do for next season that they'd already planned, and then moan behind the scenes and off the record to everybody saying, well, he never wanted any players and he's so hard to work with. Even in Kinnear's programme notes for that game, Kinnear says there were frequent reminders of the idiosyncrasies that may have made his tenure at other clubs so short. There's this like inbuilt kind of atmosphere around the board, particularly this season, of just being like, you wouldn't believe what we have to put up with Bielsa. And honestly, like that kind of phrase, if that's how they talk about somebody who did them a absolute huge post-Heckingbottom favour, I'd hate to hear them talk about somebody who actually did them wrong at some point.
Do you know, I've just discovered an amazing coincidence. We're talking about the significance of that Brentford game and those injuries. That was the day that Jesse Marsh got sacked from Red Bull Leipzig. Yeah, exactly the same day. So maybe you wonder if is that the point at which the plan then think, the guy who we wanted has now become available, so we now start looking to the summer.
And he went to Leipzig last summer, but it was on a 2-year contract, so not a particularly long-term deal. And the German Bundesliga, as it's kind of, it's not unusual for a coach to do 1 year and then move on. So, and it's not. It sounds conspiratorial. It's not, but it feels like the message there was, well, Jesse Marsh he'll get some more Champions League, Bundesliga experience at Leipzig for a year, and then the move to the Premier League with that in his pocket will be great. I don't know why him failing at Leipzig and leaving so quickly didn't make them think, well, is he actually the right guy?
Cheaper now.
Yeah. Just from the other side of this, though, you also have to accept that I'm sure that Bielsa's insistence on a 1-year contract creates a problem as well, because you're constantly having to do the future planning. I mean, any sensible football club would be future planning at all times. You'd hope that they are now for, several years down the line. Who are the prospective coaches that can come in if Marsh doesn't work out? You need to be thinking, don't you, ahead of time. So Bielsa's 1-year contract obviously always causes a problem with that too, doesn't it?
But equally, you can see it as a positive though, because you never got the impression with Bielsa that he was just. He was never Hodgson in it, was he? He never was like, well, no. Contract's up at the end of this year. What the fuck do I care? You never got that impression with him. You got the feeling he worked as hard on the last day of that contract, and indeed beyond it when he'd not even signed his next one, but it was still sort of there. He worked as hard on the last day as the first day, and was happy to do that as long as everything was in place for him.
Yeah, but treated it as a work plan.
Yeah, but
you get together every summer and say, right, what are we building this summer? What pitches need to be done at the training ground? It's not like he's negotiating a pay rise every year. It's right. We've got to the end of this season. What do we do next season?
Yeah, but the point here is that at some point he was always going to go, nah, I'm not doing it anymore. I'm not doing it again next season, and he wouldn't find out until the very end of the season. So if you've then not done your future planning and your succession, whether that's choosing to replace him or he chooses to walk away, you've then been negligent, and you'd be accused of being negligent if you haven't put plans in place for when that happens. Because it could have happened this summer. We don't know. He might have stayed. He might have gone.
But also, well, he was going because the board.
No, I'm saying his choice might have been, if they'd have left it to him to say, "Do you want to stay for another year, Marcelo?" He might have gone no.
But then last season, if the board had already decided that he was going at the end of this season, did they tell him that?
I don't know, but we're getting into double levels of speculation there, because you're speculating that they wanted rid of him.
You're speculating that Bielsa might just walk away one summer, and he would do it in summer, and instead he got sacked in February.
I know,
so
I know
that's the value of a contract.
No, I know.
We know that contracts are basically worthless, and I think there's probably more value in a contract from a coach that says, I'm going to do these things for the next 12 months, and there is absolutely no prospect of me looking for another job or taking my eye off the work that I'm doing. We will do these things together for the next 12 months, and then we will sit down and we will review the next 12 months' work, is probably worth more than we talked about Sean Dyche getting a 4-year contract, and 3 months into that he gets sacked, and the board didn't even let Bielsa work to the end of that 1-year contract, and then they get halfway through it and they're offering him players for his successor. So what that contract is actually worth from in either direction, I don't think it's something that necessarily held the club back, and it didn't hold the club back because
they stayed up.
Well, they stayed up, and also it did not prevent Victor Orta spending 2 years getting to know Jesse Marsh and deciding he is the perfect person to evolve from Marcelo Bielsa, and to, when he loses his job at the start of December, I think the conversation must have been like, don't take another job because you can have Leeds next summer if that had not already happened sooner. Nothing about Bielsa only having a 1-year contract stopped them from doing that. In some ways it makes them easier because they know when the break point is. Like we know that summer comes, and Bielsa, we will sit down with him and we can actually say, we've decided we're going to have a different coach next year, and he'll say, fair enough, well, the contract's ended, so we shake hands and walk away.
As is your right, etc. Yeah, I think there's nothing. I think the point is there's nothing necessarily wrong in doing that, and I just think the execution's been bad this season.
It's the application of it's thinking too far ahead instead of the problems in January were, and we said it then when we talked about the difference between expected goals, we needed a goal scorer, and you saw what solved the defence in the end. Is however much Jesse Marsh tying things up. Liam Cooper coming back was a big part of us suddenly defending better. Suddenly corners are being cleared. Corners have got crosses have got a defensive header on them, and it's not realising that we couldn't cope without 3 huge players who, it's luck in some respects, because if those 3 players had been Sam Greenwood, Lewis Bate, and Leo Helder had all got injured at the same time in the same game or something, not a problem, because they're not pivotal first team players. But you're talking Pat Bamford and Calvin Phillips, both England internationals. I know Pat Bamford only had 1 game and he wasn't great, but our top scorer and was second for assists last season, involved like the most important part of our attacking play, and January, and if it came down to it in January, that Bielsa was the big block between, they had 3 players lined up who, if they bought them or got them in on loan, would have solved all the problems. Sack him then, because that's actually a very, very good reason to sack a head coach who is preventing you from taking action that would get you out of relegation trouble and protect that's
a hell of a sell, though, isn't it, Moscow? I mean, if they'd have sacked him, before. I mean, we saw that the wheels kind of came off with all the goals that we were conceding, and heads started to drop and stuff. But that is, imagine the scale. It was a big enough call in February, is what I'm saying. Imagine trying to justify it in January.
But at least in January, it would have come with other actions, and because the struggle that Jesse Marsh has had is working with Bielsa's squad. And that's why it turned into, you described before, as red or black. It turned into a coin flip. If you do it in January, you've got the justification because the coach won't allow you to sign players. And you say, who is in charge here? Well, it
would have played horribly though, wouldn't it?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and we're saying it with the aid of hindsight as well.
But if it had come along with those players coming in. But then, I mean, they're playing hindsight because they keep whispering in everybody's ears saying, well, we were going to sign these players, but he wouldn't let us. He didn't want any of them. So, and I think that's what I mean. You can't have it both ways. You can't take no action, but then moan about it later because it is there. It's the club sources hindsight saying,
and that's
if we had signed those players, we would have been absolutely fine.
And it's on that point that they need to take responsibility for getting the judgment calls wrong at the wrong times, even if they've been unpopular. A stronger leadership would have seen
some unpopular decisions because it turned into an unpopular decision.
Well, it was unpopular enough at the time. Yeah, it would have been even more unpopular in January.
But I think it would have been easier to swallow if Jesse Marsh had come in with 3 new players.
Yeah.
Because you can see then,
it's physical evidence.
Yeah. And they can say quite justifiably then, we had to do it because Bielsa wouldn't take these players.
Yeah, and I think they didn't help themselves in some capacity with, for example, Radrizzani's tweet about Adam Forshaw when the midfield issue has been there for fucking years. So
there have been, I think the off-field stuff but there have been some missteps along the way as well with things like socios and even like the NFTs the other week. It's felt like everything has just been a bit like, just not now.
I haven't enjoyed it, stuff. But even going back to the kits this season, I didn't like the kits, and I know it's such a petty bloody crap middle-aged thing. I don't buy them, but I want to be
good in them though. It'd have made a difference.
Yeah, but I want to be proud of the kits we have, and I looked at the ones we've had this season. I just go, oh meh. They're just so meh.
The lilac looked quite nice when we beat Brentford.
That's correct, and it will probably be remembered for that now, ultimately in the end. But the Leicester Chelsea kit,
it didn't really work.
Not a bad football shirt, but not great for us. And it felt like the kits they were like just pissing around with the identity a little bit. Do you know what I mean? And I think that's because of a person of my age who doesn't buy the kits, but I feel a strong emotional attachment to them, particularly growing up seeing like the Umbro kits and things like that always seem to get it right on the money. And I know I'm doing that with like misty eyes about the past and my childhood and all the rest of it, but why did we have to have luminous yellow on our shirts? It looks shit. It just didn't need to happen.
There is something there as well about the building of the club of this, and I don't know whether it's whether after this 2-year period it all kicks into life, but we've said quite a lot that the difference between Leeds' commercial department and Arsenal's is the difference between half a dozen people and 200. But we never really hear much about how that gap is going to be bridged. When are we going to have a commercial department of 200 people?
Well, this is the thing about the 49ers, isn't it? I think that is the other elephant in the room. Where the ownership is at the minute, as a split 56-44, it's close to a takeover, but it's not. You've got a majority owner, but it doesn't feel like he's staying here for the long term. It starts to just create uncertainty, doesn't it? And the selling point of the 49ers appears to be infrastructure, be it physical in the form of the stadium or behind the scenes, modernising things. And we've seen updates to the ticket system. I know we can only do one thing at a time, but it is about manpower. It's bodies, it's feet on the ground, isn't it, that will enable you to start accelerating. And I do wonder what sort of changes we might see this summer. Now we know we've got Premier League status. Do they expand certain departments? Do they bring in new heads of departments? Do they bring in new directors? Who knows,
It's interesting with the rail seating in the back of the Kop that they said at the start of the season we will have that in a couple of games, and it ended up coming in a couple of games from the end. And you do wonder, like, the behind the scenes still quite Champo vibe that Leeds United,
I like how you've adopted Champo, by the way.
Leeds United still has, is that maybe there just aren't the numbers back there to make those things happen quickly. Same with the ticketing platform. Maybe that was always going to come in for the end of the season with the handover, but all these things seem to take quite a long time to get anywhere, and it's kind of, there's only so long that you can keep saying, well, we've still got the championship infrastructure. When it's one of the things when the 49ers came on board is that they weren't supposed to need a full takeover to be able to give this experience of how to improve the back office. But there doesn't really seem to be much evidence of the back office.
But they don't have control of it, though, do they? That's what I was getting at in terms of the split of shares, is that you can be as full of ideas as you want, but ultimately it's down to Radrizzani. It's his party, isn't it? So you can't really come in and say, right, well, let's do this. These are the projects we must immediately do because we're in control. Yeah. They're almost shouting from the sidelines, aren't they?
If there were more of them, then that forward planning that we were just talking about becomes easier because you can have some people working on next season with Jesse Marsh. You can have some people looking at January and saying, well, we need to do this, and kind of split some of that instead of this kind of distracted, looking too far ahead business. But yeah, I don't know, maybe the 49ers are speculation. It's saying these are the things you need to do to build up your office, and the people at Leeds and on the board are saying no, but you'd hope they're working better than that. It's just that side is also quite it needs to move faster. It's a Premier League club now. It's a Premier League club for 2 seasons, and it's hopefully staying there for 10 seasons minimum. Actually,
forever.
Jesse Marsh said we'll be winning the Champions League in 10 seasons with a full squad of academy players. So if they're going to do that, then they just fucking start some work on it, don't they?
Look forward to that. I look forward to that. But this is one thing that we can say now, is that we can all exhale from that dreadful run-in, which was just, it's been an awful season. Let's hope they don't repeat it. Radrizzani signed off his statement by saying the hard work for next season is already underway. That's good to know.
And Brendan Aronson is the start of that hard work, I guess. Because part of the having a good transfer window is doing it early as well, so you don't get to 2 weeks before the season starts and they're still trying to bring in that central midfielder that we need, or that striker that we need. If we can within the next month go, well, there's a couple of midfielders, there's a striker, here's a fullback. That's more or less what we're going with next year.
And going back to the
that would start to generate a lot of goodwill back to them, I think. Yeah, if they can all of a sudden have a proper plan for it.
Going back to last summer when we spoke to Angus Kinnear in here, it was just ahead of the start of the season. It was a few days before the season started, and there was still 3 weeks left of the window. And I guess at that point we were still hoping, well, hopefully they'll bring in a midfielder. Are they going to bring in a midfielder? We hadn't signed Dan James at that point, so you didn't know we were going to blow that money on him.
Blow that money. Yeah.
No, I think Dan James will be a perfectly serviceable addition to a Premier League squad, but not one that threadbare that desperately needed a midfielder. I think that's the problem. Is that it'd been a good signing for us.
That probably was Bielsa's fault.
Yeah,
because he did love Dan James.
But that seems to have become received wisdom. But it was Victor Orta who was sobbing and crying his eyes out and breaking his phone the night that he didn't sign.
I get the sense
because we nearly got him for like 10 pence that night, and then we had to pay 25 million quid.
I also get the sense that it wouldn't take a right lot to get Victor Orta smashing his phone and crying about anything. I
suppose it probably works because it's a player that they agree on, so that's why it gets done so quickly. But also, he's a player that Jesse Marsh seems to agree on, and he fits the Marsh. Well, I think we'll see a lot more of Jesse James, Dan James next season, because he fits the way that the Red Bull teams attack. He's a good player for that.
Yeah.
But I wouldn't be surprised if you talk about 2 10s behind a striker next season, or 2 strikers, then it's James and Aronson, because they both do that kind of attacking thing.
Both really quick.
And James plays through the middle for Wales already, so he has that kind of adaptability. I think James is a alternative to a central midfielder that we needed was a bad signing. I still don't think he's a bad signing in and of himself, and I always got the impression that him becoming available, they went and found extra money, and still had the money for a midfielder if they could find one, that they were going to do one. But I guess the budget's completely changed now that we're in there. But that's why I was surprised that we didn't get one in January.
Well, all that's in the past now. We can all be friends again, can't we?
Well, it's new friends now. So it's Brendan Aronson is going to be our new mate for $30 million, which is it's just under £24 million. And then Calvin Ramsey, a new right back, to piss off Cody Drammer even more.
If you didn't get the message last time, Cody.
He's the Scottish Football Writers Association Young Player of the Year. So that's I assume Phil Haye votes for that.
Yeah, it's still unclear as to whether he might end up here or Liverpool. It's not.
I mean, why would you go to Liverpool?
What, like those chumps?
No ambition. And then a Premier League striker, according to Phil Haye.
Hello, Eddie. But would you take Nketiah? Because I'm kind of a lot of people are going, we need to do better than that. I'd just like to see us have a bunch of competent Premier League footballers, a squad big enough full of competent Premier League footballers to get us into mid-table.
I don't fully know what Marsh's system would look like with him in it. I know when he was here last time, he looked like a really good finisher, but then didn't necessarily fit the system particularly well. But because we can play with a 2 and it's a bit more flexible, maybe there's a place for him.
Yeah,
we made him look good the other week.
There's it would be interesting. I suppose if you rely on Bamford to do most of the pressing, one of the things I was listening to Jesse talking about was how, and I think it's something he shares with Bielsa actually, is that your most important defender is your best player, because they're the player who normally has the ball, and then they're the player who is most likely to get tackled and lose the ball, and they're the player who needs to then win it back very quickly. And I think if you're talking about two strikers, that's kind of Pat Bamford's job. Is if you lose the ball, you're winning it back, and you have to show the willing. This is part of Marsh's thing: is you have to show the willing that you're going to put all the work in to win that ball back, because then the players behind you, they will come and back you up. So that's part of it. It has to be a striker who will tackle, and we know Bamford can do that because he was doing it for Bielsa. That kind of frees up the other striker to be what Eddie Nketiah was, and what frustrated Bielsa when he turned up. Bielsa always said he knows how to run into the box and score. Arsenal have taught him that, and they've taught him that beautifully. What Arsenal have never taught him to do is how to play build-up and make those runs, and so I have to try and get him to do that before I can put him into my team. I don't think Jesse Marsh will need him to do that as much. He'll just need, if Pat Bamford wins the ball back, Dan James rushes onto it, sprints into the penalty area, pings it to Nketiah, and he just shoots in the net. So he can fit.
Sounds glorious, Moscow. Let's do that.
It sounds good.
It
yeah.
does. And there we go. Done with part one of the weekly show. Went a bit longer than I expected there, but I think we needed to debrief what's gone on, didn't we?
Going on about Bielsa again.
Well, he's so inextricably tied into what's happened this season.
And it was during discussion of the board, and their main decision this year was
to sack the man who took him up. So yeah, I mean it's fair game, isn't it?
Less of Bielsa next year,
more
probably. Exactly.
Stick them out then. Part 2 is on the way. We will pick heroes and villains for the week and probably the season, I guess, given that the last week defined the season.
We didn't do that, Paul. Maybe we'll do that on a future episode. It's like player of the season hero and villain of the season stuff.
The Square Ball Podcast.